They stepped into the woods, walked down familiar trails, or set off toward distant ridges, never knowing they would not return. No screams, no signs of struggle. Sometimes their belongings were left behind, sometimes not even that. From dense forests in Vermont to deserts near secret military bases, these people vanished without a trace. No answers, just silence. In this documentary, we examine 17 real-life cases of strange and unexplained disappearances. People who were there then weren't. Some vanished in front of witnesses, others were simply gone between one breath and the next. No theories fully explain them, no searches found them. What connects these vanishings, if anything, remains unknown. This is not a story about ghosts, it's about people who walked into the wilderness and never came out. Join us as we step carefully into the quiet spaces where their footprints end, and the questions begin. The vanishing at Bennington Woods. In the southwestern corner of Vermont lies a region that has been spoken of in low voices for decades. The ground there is not different from other parts of New England. The trees are the same hardwoods, and the mountains are not the highest in the country. Yet between the Taconic Range and the Green Mountains stretches a zone that has gathered an unusual history of absence. This region later gained the name Bennington Triangle, though locals at the time of the events did not use that term. They simply called it the Woods. The first disappearance that drew public attention occurred on December 1st, 1946. An 18-year-old student named Paula Jean Weldon told her roommate at Bennington College she planned to take a short walk on the Long Trail. She put on a red parka, jeans and sneakers, and left campus around 2:45 in the afternoon. Witnesses reported seeing her near a bridge, and later speaking with an older couple walking the same trail. She never returned. The college notified authorities, and a large search was mounted. Police, volunteers, and even soldiers combed the woods. Bloodhounds traced her scent to a crossroads on the trail, but no further. Her disappearance prompted the governor of Vermont at the time, Mortimer Proctor, to call in the FBI. No body, clothing, or trace was ever recovered. 3 years later, on December 1st, 1949, another disappearance occurred on the same date. This time it was James E. Tedford, a 68-year-old veteran residing at the Bennington Soldiers' Home. He boarded a bus in St. Albans bound for Bennington. Passengers saw him reading a timetable. His belongings were placed on the seat beside him. When the bus reached its destination, Tedford was gone. His luggage and the timetable remained where he had been sitting. No one had witnessed him leave the vehicle. The bus had not made intermediate stops where he could have departed unnoticed. His case was recorded as unresolved. In October 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson also vanished in the same area. He had accompanied his mother while she worked as an animal caretaker. She left him inside a truck parked near the woods while she tended to pigs for a short time. When she returned, the child was missing. A red jacket, similar to Paula Weldon's, was the clothing he was last seen wearing. Bloodhounds again followed his scent to a road intersection and then lost the trail. No one saw him again. Later that same month, on October 28, 1950, another case deepened local unease. 53-year-old Frida Langer was hiking with a relative near Somerset Reservoir when she slipped into a stream. She told her cousin she would return to camp, change clothes, and meet him later. The camp was only half a mile away. She never arrived. Intensive searches continued for weeks. 7 months later, her body was discovered in an open area that had been searched repeatedly before. The remains were too decomposed to determine cause of death. She is the only one of the missing whose body was recovered. Between these well-documented cases lies another disappearance often linked to the region. In December 1949, a veteran named Tedford disappeared from the bus, as already noted, but local reports suggest a similar pattern had been occurring earlier. A mail carrier was said to have vanished along the route near Glastonbury Mountain in 1897. A handwritten note in an archival collection mentions the case but does not provide a resolution. Local historian Shirley Jackson, not to be confused with the novelist of the same name, collected articles and accounts in the early 1950s. Her notes suggested that the cluster of cases might extend back further than most people realised. The landscape itself holds features that complicate searches. Glastonbury Mountain, once home to a small logging town, became uninhabited after the industry collapsed. The town of Glastonbury was officially disincorporated in 1937. Railroad accidents, unexplained deaths, and economic decline left only abandoned structures. Locals mentioned that compasses sometimes failed on the mountain. They spoke of sudden winds and areas where animals avoided the terrain. In Native American oral traditions, certain areas were described as cursed or dangerous. Hunters were advised not to enter them. Reports of compasses spinning without direction remain part of the folklore, though scientific confirmation has never been published. During the peak years between 1945 and 1950, the Vermont State Police recorded a marked increase in search and rescue operations within a radius of about 200 square miles around Bennington. Records show that weather was often clear, conditions normal, and the missing individuals familiar with the outdoors. Even organised grid searches with hundreds of participants yielded no findings. Paula Weldon's case in particular became the subject of wide newspaper coverage and discussion in state government. Her file, once one of the most active missing person investigations in Vermont, now exists only as a thin manila envelope stored in an archive. Local rangers kept notes on unusual animal behaviour in the region. Deer reportedly shifted migration routes away from Glastonbury Ridge at certain times of year. Packs of coyotes were heard in sudden bursts of noise followed by unexplained silence. These notes were not conclusive, but added to the picture of a landscape that seemed indifferent to human presence. Hunters and guides offered plain statements. He went walking and did not come back. She was gone. There is nothing to say. Physical traces remain rare. Old cabins in the forest and partly collapsed. Some contain boots or utensils left behind decades ago. Moss covers stone foundations. Trails are inconsistent. A marked path may narrow suddenly and vanish. Beneath thick moss lie holes deep enough to trap a foot. Streams cut through the terrain unpredictably. Cell phone coverage is still limited. Modern hikers occasionally disappear for hours before re-emerging. A small number are never found. Theories circulate. Some suggest hidden cave systems where a misstep could lead to entrapment. Others mention magnetic anomalies interfering with direction. Folklore refers to swallowing stones and voices that lure travellers deeper into the woods. None of these explanations have been confirmed. They remain part of the oral fabric of the region, repeated in guidebooks and small-town conversations. Today, the Long Trail is still marked with cautionary signs. Hikers are advised to travel in groups. The forest, green and quiet, still opens without barriers. Visitors arrive, walk and leave. But the record remains of those who did not return. Paula Weldon in 1946, James Tedford in 1949, Paul Jepson in 1950, and Frida Langer in 1950. Their names continue to appear in state records, newspaper archives, and the recollections of those who live near the mountain. No remains, clothing, or objects beyond what has been described have surfaced. The files stay open but inactive. The case is neither solved nor forgotten. The man who walked away from the campfire. On the evening of March 17, 1985, a small group of men gathered near County Road 85 in Habersham County, Georgia. They had driven out for an ordinary hunting trip. Their gear was simple: rifles, flashlights, and radios. They set up camp, lit a fire, and sat down to talk. Among them was 40-year-old George Owen, a mill worker who had lived his whole life in the area. He was described as calm, not given to rash behaviour, and reliable enough that his friends felt no concern when he rose from the circle of firelight and said he would take a short walk. The forest in that part of Georgia is not heavy with growth. Pines and oaks rise in spaced rows, and the undergrowth is not thick. Visibility at night is limited, but it is not the kind of dense tangle that would swallow a man whole. Still, George stepped into the trees and did not return. His absence was noted quickly. At first, the men assumed he had gone to relieve himself or check the surroundings. Minutes passed. They called his name. No answer came back. When the group began to search, they fanned out in arcs carrying flashlights. The beams cut across trunks and brush, but no movement answered them. The ground was uneven but not difficult. 100 yards from the camp, the light revealed only trees, moss, and empty space. They circled wider, but there were no signs of footprints or broken branches. George had left no trail. By morning, the search expanded. More men from the county came, some with dogs, others with trucks. The dogs followed scent for a short distance, but stopped suddenly at the same place every time, as if the trail ended without transition. Helicopters were called. From above, the terrain showed no signs of struggle, no abandoned clothing, no patches of disturbed ground. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation opened a file, but no evidence moved the case forward. The other hunters were questioned. Their statements matched. They described the moment as simple. One man standing, saying little, and walking into the trees. None of them heard a cry or saw a light. There were no gunshots, no rushing footsteps, no sign of animals startled into movement. They were sitting around the fire, and then one of them was gone. The lack of detail troubled investigators. Without evidence of crime, they could not charge anyone. Without a body, they could not close the case. George Owen's wife was interviewed. She told investigators he had no debts, no enemies, and no reason to leave. His employment records showed steady work. He was not known for drinking heavily. Medical files revealed no diagnosis of illness. The possibility of voluntary disappearance was considered but dismissed as unlikely. He had not taken his car, wallet, or personal belongings. His rifle remained at camp. Nothing was missing but himself. The terrain near County Road 85 has been surveyed many times since. Hunters still move through it and occasional hikers visit. It is not marked by cliffs or sinkholes. There are no caves recorded in geological surveys. Maps show rolling forest with occasional ridges, creeks and fields. Search teams walked grid lines across the area in 1985, covering ground with methodical precision. Nothing turned up. Even clothing fragments or boot prints would have indicated a path. None appeared. The case became part of local memory, a story told at gatherings. The words repeated by those who were there remain the same. He was with us, then he wasn't. Newspaper coverage at the time was brief. Missing persons notice ran for several weeks, then faded from print. No follow-up reports appeared. The official file remains thin, containing witness statements, a few maps, and search logs. Decades later, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation still lists George Owen as missing. No death certificate was issued. His wife later moved out of state. His children grew up without a resolution. The land near County Road 85 has changed little. Forest remains where campfires once burned. Seasonal hunters pass through, unaware of what happened that night. Theories have been suggested. One is that George became disoriented and walked farther than expected, eventually succumbing to the cold. But temperatures that night were mild, above freezing. Another theory is abduction, but no tire tracks or footprints were found nearby. Wild animals are sometimes named, yet no evidence of attack was recorded. Hunters in the group were close enough that they would have heard distress. Silence was all they reported. The absence of sound became a repeated detail in the statements. They heard no cracking branches, no sudden rush, no cry. One man described it plainly. He walked into the woods like he always had before, and then nothing. That phrase appears in the file. It is written in the officer's notes, underlined once. And then nothing. The place where the dogs lost the trail has been visited more than once. The ground is ordinary, a patch of soil with leaf cover. Nothing in the vegetation suggests disturbance. The trail simply stops. Investigators compared it to other cases in which scent ended abruptly, but no satisfactory reason was given. Some handlers suggested that a man could have been lifted into a vehicle, but no tracks supported that. Others suggested weather interference, but skies were clear. Over time, the story blended with others from different parts of the country. A man leaves a circle of companions, steps into a dark line of trees, and vanishes. In Habersham County, it was recorded with care but never solved. The official file lists the cause as undetermined. No follow-up evidence has changed that line. Today, those who camp near County Road 85 see the forest as unchanged. Trees stand spaced wide, vines grow between them, and the forest floor rises and falls in quiet ridges. At night, the silence is steady. A fire throws light a few yards into the dark, then nothing more. It was into that space that George Owen walked in 1985, leaving behind no trail, no sound, and no return. The disappearance of Lars Mittank. In early July 2014, a young German man named Lars Joachim Mittank travelled with friends to Varna, a coastal city on the Black Sea in Bulgaria. He was 28 years old from northern Germany and described by his family as healthy and active. The trip was intended as an ordinary holiday. Photographs from the first days show him on the beach, relaxed and smiling, yet within a week his behaviour had shifted. What followed became one of the most widely discussed vanishings of recent decades, recorded not only in official files, but on video that has been replayed thousands of times. On July 6th, Mitank and his friends became involved in a minor dispute with another group of men at a bar. The disagreement, by all reports, was over football. Witnesses said Lars supported SV Werder Bremen, while his opponents favoured Bayern Munich. Accounts differ on how physical the altercation became, but later that evening Lars suffered a minor injury to his ear. His friends urged him to seek medical attention. A doctor diagnosed a ruptured eardrum and prescribed an antibiotic called cefuroxime. He was advised not to fly until the ear healed. The group's vacation was coming to an end. His friends needed to return to Germany, but Lars chose to remain behind until he was cleared to travel. He moved into a modest hotel near Varna Airport called Hotel Color. It was here that his behaviour grew more unusual. He phoned his mother in Germany and spoke rapidly. According to her later statement, he told her people were trying to follow him. He described overhearing men talking about him. He claimed he no longer felt safe. At one point, he asked her to cancel his bank cards. These statements were concerning, but she could not determine whether he was speaking out of fear, illness, or confusion. CCTV from the hotel shows Lars pacing the halls, looking out windows and behaving nervously. Hotel staff later recalled that he appeared polite but restless, asking questions about pharmacies and local surveillance. He reportedly refused food at one point and slept only briefly. Nothing indicated he was violent, only unsettled. On July 8th, he visited a local doctor for a follow-up on his ear. During the appointment, a construction worker entered the hallway outside. At that moment, Lars stood abruptly, left the consultation room, and ran out of the building without explanation. He did not collect his belongings. Surveillance cameras captured him running down the hallway, out through the main entrance and into the street. He was carrying only a small bag. He made his way to Varna Airport. Footage from the terminal has been widely circulated online. At approximately 9 o'clock in the morning, cameras recorded him walking through the building wearing a black t-shirt, shorts and sneakers. He was calm at first, standing in line like other passengers. Then, without warning, he dropped his bag, sprinted through the terminal doors, and ran across the parking lot. Witnesses saw him climb a fence and disappear into a field bordering the airport. He has not been seen since. Police were called. Search teams swept the surrounding fields, roads, and wooded areas. The airport security perimeter was checked carefully. His passport and wallet were later found in his abandoned bag. Bloodhounds followed his scent but lost it beyond the fence line. A formal missing persons report was filed with Bulgarian authorities, and Interpol circulated his details internationally. No confirmed sightings have been reported since that morning. Speculation on his disappearance has been broad. Some point to the antibiotic cefuroxime, suggesting it may have interacted with alcohol or triggered an adverse reaction affecting his mental state. Others consider the possibility of a psychological episode unrelated to medication. His mother later described him as previously stable, with no history of psychiatric illness. Criminal explanations have also been suggested, including the possibility of attack or abduction after leaving the airport grounds. Yet no evidence has surfaced to confirm any theory. Investigators retraced his last days. Hotel Color provided room records, CCTV, and statements from staff. Nothing indicated outside interference. The doctor he visited confirmed the minor ear injury, but reported nothing unusual until the moment Lars fled. Airport staff described the incident as sudden and without warning. No one saw where he went after crossing the fence. Fields beyond the airport lead to patches of trees, small farm plots, and distant hills. The area was searched on foot and by helicopter, but no trace appeared. Friends who had been with him earlier in the trip stated that his behaviour had shifted after the bar altercation. They noticed him becoming more cautious, occasionally distracted, but did not interpret it as serious at the time. When he decided to stay behind for medical reasons, they thought it practical. They later expressed regret that they had not recognised the level of his fear. The Bulgarian police maintain his case as open. Periodic searches have been conducted in the surrounding region, but years have passed without findings. International databases continue to list him as missing. In Germany, his family keeps photographs and records, hoping for new information. His mother has spoken in interviews, repeating the last words he told her by phone, that people were after him. These statements remain without context. The case of Lars Mitank is unusual in that his final movements are documented on video, yet provide no answers. Viewers can watch him walk calmly through the terminal, then see the instant he chooses to run. The footage shows him sprinting at full speed, exiting the frame into open air. Beyond that, nothing is known. His image frozen in those few seconds remains the last public record. Varna Airport has changed little since 2014. The terminal has been updated, but the parking area and fence lines remain. The field into which he vanished still lies open, with grass and scattered trees. Travellers pass daily through the same doors. Few notice the cameras that once recorded a man dropping his bag and running out into silence. His name remains on official lists, his fate unknown. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. On the night of May 14, 2008, a 19-year-old student named Brandon Swanson left a gathering of friends in Canby, Minnesota. It was the last day of classes at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. He had studied for finals earlier, then spent the evening with classmates. Around midnight, he said goodbye, got into his car and began the drive back to his parents' home in Marshall. The distance was about 30 miles. He never arrived. At 1:54 in the morning, Brandon called his parents on his cell phone. His voice was calm. He told them he had accidentally driven into a ditch while trying to take back roads. He believed he was near the town of Lind, about 10 miles southwest of Marshall. His car was a Chevrolet Lumina. He said it was stuck but not damaged. He asked his parents to come and pick him up. Brian and Annette Swanson left their house immediately. They drove toward Lind, calling their son repeatedly to refine directions. Brandon said he could see lights in the distance. He thought they were from the town. He flashed his car's headlights to signal, but his parents saw nothing. They drove up and down the gravel roads, honking the horn, but could not locate him. The calls continued. At one point, Brandon told them he was walking toward the lights. He said the route was clear, only gravel roads and fields. His voice remained steady. For nearly 47 minutes, the line stayed open. Brandon and his father spoke continuously. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., Brandon suddenly said, "Oh, tss," and the call ended. Redialing reached only silence. The phone remained active on the network for several hours but did not reconnect. That was the last time anyone heard from him. At daybreak, law enforcement began searching. The initial sweep focused on the area near Lind, but no car was found. By using cell tower data, investigators determined his phone had been pinging a tower near Taunton, nearly 20 miles northwest of where he believed himself to be. Later that day, his car was located along the Lincoln-Lyon County line, a rural stretch surrounded by fields and small groves. The vehicle was undamaged. The keys were missing. The doors were unlocked. There were no signs of struggle. Tracks indicated the car had become stuck in the ditch when he attempted to turn onto an unpaved road. The area around the vehicle was searched thoroughly. Ground teams moved in lines across the fields. Ditches, fences, and creek beds were examined. No footprints were found leading away from the car. Volunteers and officers used all-terrain vehicles and horses. Helicopters flew overhead with thermal imaging. Bloodhounds were brought in. Dogs followed Brandon's scent from the car north along a gravel road, across several fields and toward the Yellow Medicine River. The trail stopped at the river's edge. Some handlers believed he had entered the water. Others argued the scent may have been confused by currents or wind. The Yellow Medicine River at that location is narrow but can run swift in spring. On May 14, 2008, water levels were high from seasonal runoff. Search divers entered the river repeatedly over the following days. No trace of clothing or remains was recovered. Cadavered dogs brought in weeks later gave inconsistent signals along the banks. The river was dredged and dragged. Still, no body was found. Investigators expanded the search radius. Hundreds of volunteers joined. The fields in Lincoln and Lyon counties are wide and open, planted in corn and soybeans. In May they were bare, providing clear visibility. Searchers walked mile after mile, but nothing appeared. Local farm buildings were checked. Abandoned structures were entered. No evidence turned up. Brandon seemed to have stepped off the line of communication and left nothing behind. The official investigation reviewed his background. Brandon was 19, had no criminal record and no known disputes. He was not intoxicated, according to friends who had been with him earlier that evening. He was described as responsible, optimistic, and familiar with rural roads. His parents emphasized that he was in good spirits during the calls. The abrupt end of the line was the only sign of distress. Over time, the case attracted national attention. News outlets reported the unusual details: the long phone call, the calm tone, the sudden exclamation, and the lack of physical evidence. The phrase "oh" became quoted in articles as the final clue. What caused it remains uncertain. He may have tripped, fallen, or encountered something unexpected. The river theory remains the most common explanation, but without recovery it is not confirmed. Every spring since 2008, volunteer groups have resumed searching the area. Ground-penetrating radar has been used. Aerial surveys have scanned for changes in soil. Farmers working nearby fields have been asked to report any findings. To date, nothing has been uncovered. The absence of physical remains over more than a decade is unusual, but not impossible in rural terrain with water movement and seasonal shifts. Law enforcement continues to classify the case as an open missing persons investigation. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office maintains files of maps, phone records, and search logs. The case has been reviewed by multiple sheriffs since 2008, each confirming that no new evidence has emerged. Brandon's parents continue to speak publicly, urging that rural search protocols be improved and that no missing person be dismissed without thorough investigation. The stretch of road where Brandon's car was found remains unchanged. It is quiet farmland with gravel roads crossing at right angles. Fields stretch in straight lines to the horizon. In summer, corn grows tall, blocking sightlines. In spring, the ground is muddy and uneven. A few scattered farmhouses dot the distance. The Yellow Medicine River continues to run, winding between fields. The point where the dogs lost the scent looks like any other bend lined with grass and willows. Travellers on those roads today pass the site without awareness. There is no marker, only the record of a 19-year-old who phoned home, stayed on the line for nearly an hour, and then was gone. His name remains on state lists of missing persons. His file remains open. The voice on the call, steady and calm until the last words, is preserved in the memory of those who listened. Nothing further has been added. The vanishing of Prabdeep Srawn. In May 2013, a Canadian law student named Prabdeep Srawn travelled to Australia during a short break from his studies. He was 25 years old, born and raised in Brampton, Ontario. Before law school, he'd served in the Canadian Forces. Friends described him as adventurous, disciplined, and physically fit. He was focused on his career but also restless. He had been accepted into a law program in Australia and was taking time to explore the country before returning to his academic schedule. On May 13th, he rented a vehicle in Jindabyne, New South Wales, and drove toward the Kosciuszko National Park. That rental receipt is the last confirmed evidence of his movements. Kosciuszko National Park is the largest in New South Wales. It spans more than 2,600 square miles of alpine terrain. The park includes Mount Kosciuszko, which rises to 2,228 metres and is the highest peak on the Australian continent. The landscape combines open alpine meadows, thick forest, glacial lakes and exposed ridges. In winter, heavy snow covers much of the park, closing roads and trails. Weather changes abruptly, winds can rise to dangerous speeds, and sudden storms cut visibility to almost nothing. Search and rescue guides often warn visitors to prepare for extremes, even in warmer months. On May 13th, conditions were severe. Winds reached more than 60 kilometers per hour, and snow reduced visibility to only a few meters. 2 days later, his rented car was located near the Charlotte Pass trailhead. The vehicle was locked, and the parking stub inside showed a date of May 13th. There was no sign of damage or tampering. Inside the car, belongings were left in order. Rangers assumed he'd set out on foot. The trailhead connects to multiple routes, including the main range track that leads toward Mount Kosciuszko, Blue Lake, and other alpine ridges. It is also the starting point for multi-day treks across remote highlands. No record exists of him signing in at trail registers, and he had not informed authorities of his intended route. A single hiker recalled seeing him that afternoon on the trail, walking alone in the snow. When he did not return, a formal search began. Local police, rangers, and volunteers entered the park. Helicopters scanned ridges and valleys from above. Snow covered any tracks within hours, erasing footprints. Bloodhounds brought in by the police caught a faint scent near the car, but quickly lost it in the shifting winds. Over the next 2 weeks, the search grew into one of the largest operations conducted in the park's history. More than 700 people took part. Crews faced whiteout conditions, avalanche risk, and freezing temperatures. At times, visibility dropped to less than a few meters, forcing teams to halt. Searchers later described it as among the most difficult efforts they had ever faced. Despite the scale, nothing was recovered. Not a scrap of clothing, not a boot print, not a dropped item of equipment. The absence stood out because large-scale searches usually uncover at least fragments, a backpack, a piece of gear, or clothing caught on branches. Infrared cameras on aircraft scanned night after night but found no signs of heat. After 2 weeks, New South Wales police scaled back the official operation. They concluded he was presumed dead, most likely from exposure to the cold. His family rejected that conclusion. They argued that he had military training and could survive in the wild. They insisted he was resilient, disciplined, and unlikely to have perished so quickly. Members of his family travelled to Australia to continue the search privately. They hired helicopters and contracted independent search teams. Reports surfaced of faint signals detected by emergency beacons in the region, but none could be confirmed as belonging to his device. Satellite companies examined logs for anomalies, but no data matched his location. As weeks passed, the possibility of survival diminished, but the family continued to believe he might still be alive. The case drew international attention. Canadian and Australian media reported daily updates. Commentators emphasised the contrast between the enormous search effort and the absence of evidence. Park rangers noted that alpine snow can conceal bodies and equipment for months or years. Avalanches can bury objects deep below layers of ice and rock. Streams fed by snowmelt flow strong in spring, capable of carrying clothing or gear far downstream. Yet even considering these factors, the lack of any trace was unusual. Kosciuszko National Park has seen other disappearances. Its alpine environment is unforgiving, and visitors often underestimate the risks. Records show several cases of lost hikers over the decades. Most are found within days. A smaller number remain unaccounted for. Sraun's disappearance, however, stands apart because of the scale of resources deployed and the complete lack of resolution. Maps show that routes from Charlotte Pass branch in multiple directions, towards Blue Lake, toward the summit of Mount Kosciuszko, and into the rugged main range. All of these areas were covered repeatedly by search teams, yet none produced results. Investigators also reviewed his personal background. They found no indication that he'd intended to vanish voluntarily. He had remained in contact with friends and family in Canada before the hike. He had made concrete plans for the coming weeks. He had purchased only short-term items for his trip, with no signs of long-term preparation. His academic studies were ongoing, and there was no financial pressure. No records suggested a reason for deliberate disappearance. Police reports concluded that voluntary vanishing was unlikely. By late May, fresh snow had buried the area. The official search was suspended. Unofficial groups continued sporadically into the summer months. When snow receded, teams returned to valleys, ridges, and lakes. Still, no trace was found. His rental car remained in storage, its presence at Charlotte Pass a fixed but unhelpful reminder. The silence of the record persisted. His disappearance remains open in police records. Interpol lists his name. Canadian authorities keep files active. Each year, hikers entering Kosciuszko National Park are reminded of the risks. His case is referenced in safety briefings at the Park Visitor Centre. A small plaque near the Charlotte Pass trailhead mentions his name, a quiet marker for those who stop to read. Travellers pass the sign and consider the story of a Canadian student who set out alone and did not return. The region itself remains unchanged. The alpine ridges rise cold against the sky. Snow builds against the rocks in winter. In summer, meadows fill with alpine flowers and streams run clear. Trail markers stand in place, weathered by wind. The land carries no visible sign of what occurred. The silence of the alpine air is complete. His name remains on official lists, his file unclosed. No evidence has emerged to alter the record of a man who walked into the snow and did not walk back out. The Girl in the Hollow Tree. In the spring of 1943, 4 young men entered Hagley Wood near the village of Wychbury in Worcestershire, England. The men were local residents moving through the forested land despite wartime restrictions. They were looking for firewood, mushrooms, or perhaps game. The land was technically private, owned by an estate, but the scarcity of food and fuel during the war led many into the woods. While moving through the undergrowth, one of them noticed the twisted trunk of a large wych elm. Its hollow interior had caught his attention. Inside the cavity, he saw something pale. At first, he thought it was an animal skull. When he reached in, he realized it was human. The men backed away. They did not report the discovery immediately, fearing punishment for trespassing. Later that evening, the youngest of the group told his parents, police were informed. The following day, officers arrived with forensic specialists. Inside the hollow of the elm, they found the partial skeleton of a young woman. Most of the body was intact, folded into the cavity. One hand had been severed and was buried nearby. A shoe, fragments of clothing and strands of hair were present. The skull showed a full set of teeth. Forensic pathologist James Webster examined the remains. He estimated the woman had been dead for at least 18 months, possibly longer. The cause of death could not be determined, though a piece of taffeta stuffed deep into the mouth suggested suffocation. The discovery was noted in official records as unusual. Wartime Britain had many missing persons, but the location and conditions stood out. The hollow of the elm had concealed the body effectively. Without the chance discovery, it might never have been found. The police attempted to identify the woman through dental records. No match was made. Her age was estimated between 20 and 35. She was described as having light brown hair and being of slight build. Newspapers reported the case with restrained headlines. Wartime censorship limited sensational stories, but the image of a girl in a tree spread quickly. Months later, graffiti began to appear in Birmingham, 15 miles away. In white chalk on the side of a wall, someone wrote, "Who put Bella in the witch elm?" The phrase was repeated in different locations across the city. Each time the handwriting appeared similar. The implication was that someone knew the victim's name. Police adopted the term Bella in their files, though no official confirmation of her identity was ever made. The graffiti continued for years. No one was ever identified as the writer. Theories emerged. Some suggested the woman was a prostitute from Birmingham who had vanished around 1941. Others believed she might have been a foreigner, possibly involved with airmen stationed in the area. Wartime brought many outsiders to Worcestershire: soldiers, workers, and refugees. Some researchers later suggested a connection to espionage. A German agent named Josef Jakobs was captured by parachute in Cambridgeshire in 1941. He carried a photograph of a woman named Clara Bauerle, a singer rumoured to have links to German intelligence. Some writers claimed Bauerle was Bella. Records, however, showed she died in Berlin in 1942. The theory lost support. Other suggestions connected the case to local folklore. Witchbury Hill near Hagley Wood had long been associated with old legends. Stories of witches, rituals, and hidden gatherings circulated in the area. The severed hand found near the tree led some to speculate about ritual killing. No evidence supported this, but the idea persisted in popular accounts. Police dismissed the suggestion, stating the hand might simply have been separated during decomposition or by scavenging animals. Forensic examinations were limited by the standards of the time. No DNA testing existed. Clothing was too deteriorated to yield useful clues. The skull was photographed, and a facial reconstruction was attempted. The results suggested a young woman with narrow features. Still, no identification followed. The remains were eventually buried in a local cemetery. The grave was unmarked. Files were stored in police archives. In later decades, the case returned to public discussion. Writers produced books linking Bella to espionage, witchcraft, or personal disputes. The graffiti continued sporadically into the 1970s, appearing in different places with the same phrase. Who put Bella in the witch elm became part of local culture. It appeared in songs, poems, and novels. The mystery attached itself to the hollow tree, which stood for decades before eventually decaying and collapsing. Researchers who reviewed the case in the 21st century emphasized its ordinariness despite the strange elements. A missing woman, likely from Birmingham, placed in a tree to hide the body, a phrase scrawled in chalk giving her a name. No witnesses, no records, no closure. The unusual circumstances elevated it beyond other wartime disappearances, but the evidence remained sparse. Even the severed hand may have been an ordinary detail of concealment, not ritual. Still, the lack of identification continues to puzzle investigators. If her name was Bella, no family came forward to claim her. The site today is quiet woodland. Paths wind between oaks and elms. Visitors walk past without noticing where the hollow once stood. The story remains in local museums, newspaper archives, and scattered graffiti that still appears on occasion. Her name is spoken as if she were known, though she remains anonymous. The hollow tree is gone, but the question continues. Who was the young woman placed inside it? Why was she hidden in such a way? The official files remain thin, the answer remains absent. The vanishing of Connie Johnson. In October 2018, 62-year-old Connie Johnson was working as a camp cook for a hunting party in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness of Idaho. She was experienced in outdoor life, having spent many years in the region as a caretaker and guide. Friends described her as independent, competent, and deeply familiar with the mountains. She had once worked as a backcountry ranger, a role that required long stretches alone in remote cabins. She was known to be steady, careful, and unafraid of isolation. For that reason, her disappearance remains unusual. She did not return from a short walk near camp and was never seen again. The Selway Bitterroot Wilderness covers more than 1.3 million acres. It is one of the most remote tracts in the lower 48 United States. Access is by foot or horseback only. Roads do not reach the interior. Terrain is steep, forests are dense, and rivers cut deep canyons. Weather shifts rapidly. In autumn, mornings can bring frost, sleet, or sudden snow. Even those who know the land well can be caught by surprise. Connie Johnson understood these factors better than most. Yet on October 2nd, 2018, she vanished within sight of her camp, leaving no explanation behind. Her group was based near Big Fog Mountain, a rugged landmark surrounded by high ridges and valleys. Several Forest Service workers and a young biologist named Harry Walker were with her that season. The hunters left camp in the morning, heading into the surrounding ridges in search of game. Connie remained behind to cook, maintain supplies, and tend to daily chores. When the men returned in the afternoon, she was gone. Her dog, a border collie named Ace, was missing as well. At first, they assumed she had gone for a short walk. But as hours passed and evening fell, their concern deepened. When she did not return by the following day, they reported her missing. The search began quickly. Helicopters flew over Big Fog Mountain. Ground teams spread out from the camp in widening circles. Riders on horseback moved through the trails scanning for signs. For days, crews covered canyons, ridges and streams. Weather complicated every effort. Rain turned to sleet, fog rolled in, and visibility narrowed. Bloodhounds were brought to the camp. They picked up faint traces of scent near where Connie had last been seen, but the trail faded within a short distance. No clear direction emerged. Volunteers joined after official crews scaled back. They rode and walked through the wilderness for weeks, calling her name into the stillness. Nothing was found. Ace, the dog, reappeared weeks later. Hunters spotted him near a remote road miles from the last known camp. He was thin but alive. Searchers hoped he might lead them back to Connie, but he did not. He lingered near humans, yet gave no indication of where he had been. The appearance of the dog without his owner only deepened the mystery. If Connie had fallen or become trapped, why had Ace not stayed with her? If she had wandered far, how had the dog managed to return while she did not? Investigators reviewed Connie's background. She had lived for years in backcountry stations, sometimes alone for entire seasons. She knew how to handle emergencies and carried equipment suited for the conditions. She was skilled with maps and compasses. She was not known to suffer from disorientation. No medical records suggested conditions that might explain sudden confusion or wandering. Family members confirmed she was in good health at the time. There was no evidence of intent to vanish voluntarily. She had made plans beyond the hunting season and left behind personal belongings at camp. The facts only sharpened the puzzle. The terrain around Big Fog Mountain is rugged but not impassable. Trails wind through forests of fir and larch. Open ridges provide clear views for miles. Streams cut deep into rock, forming natural barriers. Caves are rare, and sinkholes almost unknown. Searchers covered the ground repeatedly. Aerial surveys used infrared cameras. Ground-penetrating radar checked sections of unstable soil. Still, no trace appeared. Not a piece of clothing, not a footprint, not a fragment of equipment. The complete absence of clues stood out. Theories circulated. Some suggested she had been attacked by a wild animal, though no blood or remains were ever found. Others pointed to the steep canyons, where a single fall could carry a body out of sight. Still others considered foul play, but no evidence supported that idea. The hunters with her were interviewed carefully and cleared of suspicion. None had reason to harm her. The case remained listed simply as missing. As winter arrived, snow buried the region. Searches paused until the following spring, when melting snow opened the trails again. Volunteers returned to the ridges and valleys. Once again, nothing surfaced. The absence of evidence was striking. Even in vast wilderness, it is unusual for a body to vanish so completely when the starting point is known. In many cases, searchers find at least fragments, boots, a backpack, or a torn jacket, after the thaw. In this case, there was nothing at all. The Selway Bitterroot Wilderness has recorded other disappearances, though few as puzzling. Rangers note that weather, terrain, and distance complicate every search. Helicopters cannot cover every fold of land. Crews on foot can pass within yards of remains and never notice. Rivers can carry objects for miles. Yet Connie Johnson's long experience in the wilderness sets her case apart. She knew how to avoid hazards. She had survived alone in remote cabins for months. Her disappearance so close to camp remains unexplained. The Forest Service keeps her name on official lists of the missing. The sheriff's office in the county maintains a file containing maps, interviews, and flight logs from the search. Ace the dog was later placed with another family, where he still lives. His survival is one of the only tangible details in the record. Connie herself has left no further trace. Big Fog Mountain stands as it did in 2018. Trails remain narrow, weather shifts without warning, communication is limited, and GPS signals fade under the ridges. The wilderness continues unchanged, indifferent to human loss. Visitors still enter its forests each year. Some are aware of Connie's story, most are not. The camp where she was last seen has no marker. Only the record remains, noting that a woman who walked into the forest with knowledge, experience, and care was not seen again. The boy who walked out the back door. On the morning of June 4, 2010, a science fair was held at Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. Students had spent days preparing displays in classrooms. Parents and relatives walked the halls, moving from room to room, stopping to see projects set up on desks and tables. Among the children was 7-year-old Kyron Horman. He had prepared a board on the red-eyed tree frog, carefully arranged with photographs and facts. Photographs taken that morning show him standing proudly beside the display, wearing glasses and a black t-shirt printed with the logo of the television series CSI. Those pictures became the last verified images of him alive. Kyron had arrived at the school with his stepmother, Terry Horman. According to her statement, the two walked together through the fair, visiting other classrooms and admiring projects. She said she left him in the hallway near his classroom shortly before 9 a.m. Classes were scheduled to begin soon after. From that point forward, his presence vanished. He did not enter the classroom. He did not appear anywhere else in the school, and when the end of the day came, he did not return home. By the afternoon, teachers and staff realized he was missing. His father, Kane Horman, was notified, and at 3:45 p.m. the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office began an investigation. The initial search concentrated on the school grounds themselves. Deputies walked through classrooms, closets, storage spaces, and the playground. Bloodhounds were brought in. They followed Kyron's scent through the corridors but lost the trail near a rear exit. Witness statements offered no clarity. One student believed she saw him near the south entrance after the fair, but the timing could not be confirmed. Teachers stated they did not see him after 9 a.m. No one recalled hearing a disturbance or cry for help. The security system at the time was limited. Several doors had no cameras. The back exit in particular had no working surveillance. By evening, the search spread beyond the school. Volunteers gathered in the gymnasium and were assigned to teams. They moved through fields, wooded slopes and streams within a 2-mile radius. The terrain around Skyline Elementary is steep in places and covered in heavy brush. Helicopters circled overhead with infrared scanners. Boats searched nearby waterways, yet nothing was found. The following day, the operation expanded further. It became one of the largest search efforts in Oregon's history. Hundreds of police officers, firefighters, and citizens formed lines and swept the area in grids. They combed through more than 2 square miles. Despite the scale, no trace emerged. Attention soon turned to Terry Horman. Investigators questioned her repeatedly. She said that after leaving Kyron at the school, she ran errands. Records confirmed her presence at a grocery store. Later that morning, she drove her infant daughter on rural roads, explaining that she did so to soothe the child. The route was examined but provided no clues. Kane Horman and other relatives were interviewed as well. None faced charges, and no physical evidence pointed directly to abduction or accident. Tips arrived from across Oregon and other states. Several people reported possible sightings of a boy resembling Kyron. None were confirmed. The case drew national attention almost immediately. News crews gathered outside the school. The photograph of Kyron at the science fair, glasses on, smiling beside his project, appeared in newspapers and broadcasts across the country. Posters were distributed widely. Despite the attention, no verified leads developed. The investigation narrowed in focus. Law enforcement concentrated heavily on Terry Horman's activities and background. Friends and acquaintances gave conflicting impressions. Some described her as resentful or unstable. Others said she was attentive and caring. In late June 2010, Kane Horman filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order, citing concerns that arose during the inquiry. Prosecutors examined whether she might have been involved, but no charges were filed. Terry denied any wrongdoing. Years later, she left Oregon and lived elsewhere. Still under suspicion in the public mind, but never convicted of any crime related to the disappearance. Forensic examinations of the Horman home and vehicles were extensive. Computers, phones, and electronic devices were analysed. No incriminating evidence surfaced. The theory that Kyron had been abducted from the school remained possible, but it was never supported by physical proof. No witnesses reported seeing a stranger take him. No suspicious vehicles were confirmed. The timeline of his last known moments remained incomplete, and without that clarity, the case stalled. The search covered more than 1,500 acres over the following weeks. Divers entered ponds and creeks. Cadaver dogs swept across wooded slopes and fields. Specialized rope teams descended steep areas of terrain. Every effort ended the same way, with no result. The absence of physical evidence became the defining feature of the case. Most missing child investigations yield at least fragments, clothing, tracks, or confirmed sightings. In Kyron's case, nothing at all was found. The file grew thick with reports but thin with answers. As the years passed, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office kept the case open. Periodic press conferences marked anniversaries of the disappearance. Officials asked again for information, hoping for new witnesses or confessions. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released age-progressed images showing how Kyron might appear as a teenager or young adult. These were distributed online and in print, yet no new evidence ever emerged. The school itself remains. Skyline Elementary continues to operate. New students fill its classrooms, unaware of the history tied to the building. The back door, once without a camera, is now secured. The hillside behind the school is still covered in brush, with narrow trails leading to the creek below. Vehicles pass along Skyline Boulevard daily, the routine undisturbed. The landscape has not altered the record. A boy was left in the hallway of his school on the morning of June 4th, 2010, walking toward his classroom, and was never seen again. The name Kyron Horman continues to appear on state and national lists of missing children. His case is one of the most extensive in Oregon's history. Investigators still receive tips, though none have altered the course of the inquiry. His photograph from the science fair endures as the defining image, a child in glasses smiling beside a colourful display board, moments before absence. The hunter at Loon Lake. In November 2019, 82-year-old Thomas Messick joined 6 companions for a hunting trip near Brant Lake in Warren County, New York. The group included family and friends, most of them younger men. Messick had hunted for decades, and despite his age, he remained active in the outdoors. He walked with the aid of a short folding cane but was otherwise in steady condition. A retired National Guard member, he carried with him a lifetime of outdoor experience. The men divided into 2 teams that morning. 4 moved deeper into the woods to walk the ridges, while 3 others, including Messick, positioned themselves at fixed points to wait quietly. The method was familiar. The moving hunters would drive deer toward those stationed at lookout points. Messick was placed near the road, within sight and earshot of his companions. It was considered one of the safest positions. The terrain around Loon Lake is forested but not extreme. Rolling hills rise gradually rather than steeply. Small streams cut across the low ground, bordered by thickets and groves. In autumn, with the leaves already fallen, visibility is clear for long distances between the bare trunks. That day, the weather was favourable. Skies were clear, temperatures cool but not severe. The hunters expected nothing unusual. They left Messick at his assigned spot at around 10 a.m. He carried his rifle, wore camouflage clothing, boots, and an orange hunting cap. A walkie-talkie hung at his side for radio communication. Then the others moved on. When the hunt ended and the group returned to their designated points, Messick was not where they had left him. His chair sat empty. His rifle, radio, and belongings were gone with him. The ground showed no marks of disturbance. He had not spoken into the radio. The others began to search. They shouted his name, fired signal shots, and blew whistles into the woods. There was no response. Within hours, concern grew. Messick's limited mobility meant he could not have gone far, yet he had vanished without sound or trace. The official search began that same afternoon. Local police joined with forest rangers and volunteers. Helicopters flew above the canopy, circling slowly with observers scanning the ground. Ground teams formed lines and moved systematically through the forest. Bloodhounds were brought in, but the dogs failed to detect a consistent trail. Searchers concentrated first on the half-mile radius around his last known position. They expected a quick resolution, but no sign appeared. Over the following days, the search grew larger. More than 300 people joined. They covered several square miles, checking ridges, stream beds, and old logging roads. Drones equipped with cameras were deployed, boats searched ponds and shorelines. The expectation was that at least some item, perhaps a hat, glove, or shell casing, would be visible in the leaf litter. Yet nothing emerged. The forest floor appeared untouched, as though no one had passed through. Investigators reviewed the most likely explanations. A fall or sudden medical emergency was possible, but his body would have been discovered within the initial search grid. Abduction was considered unlikely, but it could not be ruled out. No unfamiliar vehicles had been reported in the vicinity. No tire tracks were found. A wildlife encounter was also raised. Bears and coyotes inhabit the region, but there were no signs of struggle, no blood, and no remains. None of the ordinary explanations fit. The case remained open without conclusion. Messick's background offered no easy answers. He had served more than 20 years in the National Guard and was regarded as cautious in the outdoors. He carried his rifle and radio that day, both of which were never recovered. He wore boots, camouflage clothing, and a bright orange cap designed to make him visible to other hunters. Family members described him as reliable, careful, and in good health for his age. He had no history of disorientation, wandering, or memory lapses. His disappearance was entirely out of character. The official search continued for several weeks before being scaled back. Volunteers carried on afterward, returning in smaller numbers to sweep the woods. Winter arrived, and snow fell across the ridges, covering the ground and ending the season's efforts. In spring, when the snow melted, teams resumed their search. They returned to the same points, moving again through the terrain. Once more, no trace was found. No items of clothing, no bones, no equipment. The complete absence of evidence became the defining feature of the case. The region around Loon Lake has long been used for hunting and fishing. The forest is not considered unusually dangerous. Trails are marked and travelled. Local residents and seasonal visitors use the land regularly. Searchers pointed out that Messick had vanished in a place close to a road, not far into remote wilderness. The group had positioned him at one of the easier access points. They emphasised that he disappeared within earshot of others in terrain that was not especially difficult to cover. They heard nothing, saw nothing, and found nothing. Interviews with the other hunters were consistent. Each repeated the same sequence. They left him in his chair, went on with the drive, and returned later to find him gone. None recalled movement or noise. Radios carried by the men showed no record of communication. Batteries were tested and found functional. If Messick had become injured or disoriented, investigators noted, it was likely he would have called on the radio. His silence on the line remains one of the most troubling aspects. As time passed, theories spread beyond the official inquiry. Some speculated about sudden abduction, others about unmarked terrain features such as hidden pits or sinkholes. None of these ideas have been supported by evidence. The absence of any trace continues to distinguish the case from other disappearances. Rangers and police involved in the search later described it as one of the most baffling events of their careers. The file remains open with the New York State Police. Periodic reviews confirm that no new leads have emerged. Messick's name remains on the state's missing persons list. His family has continued to request information and assistance. Occasional volunteer searches are still mounted, though expectations of discovery diminish with time. The record closes without explanation, classified simply as unresolved. The forest near Brant Lake remains quiet. Trails still cross ridges. Hunters continue to enter each autumn. Streams run as they always have through the low ground. The chair where Messick once sat has long been removed, but the point can still be identified on maps and in memory. The silence of the woods remains complete. Nothing in the landscape explains how an experienced man, seated with equipment, a radio, and a rifle, could vanish within sight of companions. His absence persists as fact, unchanged by years, unbroken by evidence. The mystery of Dennis Martin. On June 14, 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin vanished in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, on the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. His family had travelled there for Father's Day, continuing a tradition of camping in the mountains. They chose Spence Field, a high grassy meadow bordered by ridges and dense forest. It was a popular spot, known to hikers who passed along the Appalachian Trail. That afternoon, Dennis played with his brother and several other children while the adults sat nearby. The boys decided to hide and surprise the parents. They split into 2 groups, circling opposite sides of the meadow. When the children ran back out, Dennis was not among them. His father, William Martin, began searching immediately. He walked the meadow, calling his son's name. When there was no answer, he went down the trail, minutes stretched into an hour. Park rangers were notified quickly. By evening, the search had begun. What followed became one of the largest search operations in the history of the Smokies. Within 48 hours, more than 240 people were involved. The number eventually grew to over 1,400. Soldiers from Fort Bragg and other nearby bases were deployed. Boy Scouts, volunteers, and professional trackers entered the woods. Helicopters scanned from the air. Bloodhounds were brought to the site. Despite the scale, no sign of Dennis was found. The terrain around Spence Field is difficult. Forest is thick with undergrowth, slopes are steep, and sudden drop-offs cut into the ridges. Creeks run cold and fast through narrow ravines. Small caves and sinkholes appear across the land. Trails are narrow and winding, with limited visibility under heavy canopy. During the first night, heavy rain fell, washing away tracks and lowering temperatures. For a child without shelter, the conditions were harsh. Some believed Dennis could not have survived the exposure. Others noted that children have lived for days in mountain conditions if they keep moving or find cover, yet no trace of him appeared. Trackers reported seeing small footprints in the mud along a trail. They seemed to belong to a child, but the impressions overlapped with others, and certainty could not be established. Bloodhounds followed a faint scent for a short distance but lost it in the rain. Searchers moved in grid lines across miles of forest. They rappelled into ravines, climbed ridges, and entered caves with flashlights. Every effort ended the same way. No discovery. The absence of evidence frustrated the teams. In most missing child cases, some clue surfaces, an article of clothing, a fragment of food packaging, or a clear footprint. In this case, nothing verifiable was recovered. Theories arose almost immediately. One suggested that Dennis had become disoriented and walked deeper into the woods until exposure overtook him. Another proposed that he'd fallen into a cave or sinkhole concealed from view. A third theory, darker, involved abduction. During the search, a family camping in another area of the park reported seeing a rough-looking man moving through the trees, carrying something over his shoulder. The sighting occurred around the same time Dennis disappeared. The report was taken seriously, but no connection could be proven. Investigators noted it, but the link remained unconfirmed. The search continued for weeks before scaling back. The Martin family stayed in the area, walking trails daily hoping for signs. Officials reviewed the file repeatedly. No evidence of foul play surfaced, yet the absence of physical clues made natural explanations less convincing. Over time, the case was revisited by journalists, authors, and television programs. Each emphasized the enormous scale of the search compared with the complete lack of results. Some writers connected it to other disappearances in the Smokies, though no official link was established. The case of Dennis Martin became part of the region's folklore. Hikers spoke of strange silences in the forest. Some retold the story of the figure glimpsed in the woods, carrying something heavy. Others pointed to the storm, noting how the downpour erased tracks and reduced visibility. Rangers maintained the official position, a child missing, most likely lost to the elements. The file, however, remained open, unresolved and without closure. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park sees millions of visitors each year. Trails cross ridges, descend into valleys, and pass through meadows like Spence Field. Today, hikers can still stand where Dennis last played. The meadow looks unchanged. Grass ripples in the wind and the tree line stands dense and dark around its edges. The Appalachian Trail continues toward Rocky Top and Thunderhead Mountain. Most visitors pass without knowing the story. Only those familiar with the history recall that a child once ran into the woods there and did not return. Over the decades, the case has been studied by experts in search and rescue operations. Some emphasize lessons learned, the importance of containment in the first hours, the difficulty of coordinating large numbers of searchers, and the way weather can erase fragile evidence. Others point out that the Smokies are not easily yielded. The mountains contain deep ravines, heavy vegetation, and caves not marked on maps. In such terrain, absence can persist indefinitely, even under intensive search. The Martin family never received answers. For years afterward, William Martin expressed hope for some sign, however small. He told interviewers that uncertainty was harder than grief. Without a body, without clothing, without any evidence, closure was impossible. Officially, Dennis Martin remains missing. Unofficially, his story has become one of the most enduring mysteries of the national park system. Spence Field itself continues to host campers and hikers. Silence falls at night, broken only by wind moving through the grass and the sound of distant streams. The forest holds its distance. The official file remains active but unresolved. The boy's name endures on missing person lists unchanged by time. Nothing has altered the record. Dennis Martin stepped into the trees in June 1969, and he did not come back. The Logging Road Disappearance. On April 1, 2014, two young women from the Netherlands began a hike on the Pianista Trail near Boquete, a small town in western Panama. Their names were Lisanne Froon, age 22, and Chris Creamers, age 21. They had arrived in Panama only weeks earlier as part of a volunteer program. Both were university students, described by friends and family as responsible, organised, and adventurous, but not reckless. Their plan that day was simple: a short walk on a well-known trail, a chance to see the forest and take photographs. They carried light packs with a few personal items, 2 phones, and a digital camera. They did not bring maps, tents, or heavy gear. The Pianista Trail is a popular route, beginning with farmland and wide paths before climbing gradually into cloud forest. Their departure was casual, in keeping with an outing expected to last only a few hours. When they did not return that evening, the host family assumed they had stayed overnight with friends or taken a detour. By the next morning, concern grew. When they failed to appear for scheduled appointments, authorities were notified. On April 3rd, a search began. Police, firefighters, and local guides entered the forest. Helicopters scanned from above. Rivers, ravines, and trails were checked. Despite intensive effort, no sign was found during the first crucial days. The search expanded, eventually drawing assistance from Dutch police, who travelled to Panama to join the investigation. The disappearance of 2 foreign students in a tourist region drew international coverage. It became both a tragedy and a mystery, marked not by evidence but by the absence of it. Phone records became one of the first significant sources of information. 10 days after the women vanished, investigators accessed their devices. Logs showed repeated attempts to call emergency numbers. Beginning on April 1st, multiple calls to 112 and 911 were placed, sometimes within minutes of each other. None connected due to lack of cellular coverage. Calls continued over several days, often at regular intervals, as though they were systematically trying whenever signal might appear. Battery levels dropped gradually. By April 6th, one phone ceased to function. The other remained active longer, logging its final signal on April 11th. The pattern suggested deliberate, persistent attempts to seek help. It indicated that at least one of the women remained alive for days after the hike began. The camera they carried offered more evidence. It contained over 100 images. The early photographs showed the women smiling along the trail, posing at overlooks, and standing beside a creek. These daylight pictures ended on April 1st. Then a gap appeared. More than a week later, a series of nighttime images began. Taken in complete darkness, they showed fragments, tree branches, rocks, a patch of ground. Some appeared to capture a possible path or ravine. Theories developed. Some believed the flash had been used as a signal, repeated in the night to attract attention. Others thought the women were attempting to navigate dangerous ground and used the light to document their surroundings. None of the photographs revealed faces or context clearly. They remain ambiguous, a record without explanation. Months passed before the next discovery. A local woman found a backpack on a riverbank near Alto Romero, several miles from the trail. Inside were 2 pairs of sunglasses, cash, passports, a water bottle, the phones, and the camera. Strikingly, the contents were dry and in good condition, unusual for an environment known for heavy rain and fast-moving rivers. The pack appeared deliberately placed rather than carried downstream. To investigators, it provided important physical evidence, but it also raised new questions. How had the items avoided damage? Why were valuables left untouched? The discovery deepened the puzzle. Subsequent searches in the same area revealed human remains. A boot containing a foot was recovered. Part of a pelvis was found nearby. Later, scattered bone fragments appeared along the riverbed. Forensic testing confirmed they belonged to Lisanne Froon and Chris Creemers. The bones showed little trauma, no clear sign of animal attack or violent struggle. Some were described as unusually clean, as though exposed to chemical treatment or accelerated decomposition. Panamanian officials concluded the deaths were accidental, most likely the result of a fall, misadventure, or drowning. Dutch authorities expressed dissatisfaction, noting inconsistencies between the condition of the remains and the official explanation. Theories multiplied quickly. Some suggested that the women had continued beyond the marked trail, following an unmarked fork into more difficult terrain. Others suspected crime, pointing to the possibility of robbery or assault. Yet the presence of money and passports in the recovered pack made theft unlikely. Interviews with locals produced no verified sightings after April 1st. Rumours circulated of strangers seen with the women or guides who might have led them further than planned. None of these claims were confirmed. The absence of definitive evidence left space for speculation, which grew as the years passed. The Pianista Trail itself is short and well worn, but once it climbs into cloud forest, conditions change. Mist and rain obscure visibility. Ravines cut deeply into the land. Rivers swell rapidly during storms. Paths vanish beneath undergrowth. Even experienced hikers can be challenged. For those without maps, GPS or camping gear, risks multiply quickly. Yet friends and family of Lisanne and Chris insisted they were careful. They were not known to take unnecessary risks. Why they left the marked trail at all remains uncertain. International interest persisted long after the search ended. Media in the Netherlands followed the case closely. Families of the women travelled repeatedly to Panama, pressing authorities for answers. Documentaries and books analysed the timeline, the phone records, the photographs, and the condition of the backpack. Online communities dissected each detail, from the exact call times to the unusual appearance of the bones. Theories emerged in abundance, but none brought resolution. The official classification remains accidental death, though doubts endure. The jungle near Alto Romero is remote. Rivers cut through steep terrain, running swiftly in rainy season. Trails are faint or absent. The spot where the backpack was found shows no signs of settlement. Bones recovered nearby were scattered, consistent with movement by water or animals. Yet the absence of other belongings, such as shoes or full clothing, remains unexplained. Even with extensive search, no complete remains were ever located. Today, visitors in Boquete still walk the Pianista Trail. Signs now warn of risks beyond the marked route. Guides are available to accompany hikers. Locals remember the story of the 2 young women. Their names are tied to the landscape, part of its cautionary history. In the official files of Panama shared with Dutch authorities, the case remains unresolved. What endures are unanswered questions. How 2 young travellers, careful and healthy, stepped into the cloud forest and left behind only fragments, scattered bones, and a silence that remains. The cold case of David Lang. On the afternoon of September 23, 1880, in Gallatin, Tennessee, a man named David Lang was said to have vanished while walking across his farm. The story has been told and retold for more than a century. Its details remain debated, its sources uncertain, and its status suspended between folklore and fact. Yet the account persists in books of mysteries, in paranormal collections, and in oral tradition. Whether true, embellished, or invented, the case has endured because absence itself took form as history. According to the version most often repeated, David Lang lived with his wife, 2 children and several farmhands on a property outside Gallatin. The land was typical of Sumner County in the late 19th century, rolling fields, pastureland and wooded edges. On the day in question, Lang walked across one of these fields toward livestock. At the same time, a visiting judge and his companion were said to be arriving at the property by carriage. They saw Lang step into the field, raise a hand in greeting and continue forward. A moment later, in full view of witnesses, he was no longer visible. The ground was flat and grassy. There were no wells, holes or obstructions. Accounts insist he had not run, stumbled or fallen. He had simply vanished. His wife screamed, drawing the attention of neighbours and farmhands. A search began immediately. Men lined up and moved shoulder to shoulder across the field. They looked for openings, depressions, or signs of disturbance in the grass. None were found. They called his name, fired shots, and searched the surrounding woods. No sound returned. The county sheriff was said to have been notified, though no surviving record has been located. Later accounts written decades afterward describe a fruitless search and the astonishment of those present. In the following weeks, the family continued to visit the field. They returned daily to the place where Lang had last been seen. According to some retellings, the grass began to wither in that spot, forming a circle where nothing would grow. This detail appeared in later publications, but no physical proof has ever been produced. The couple's children, still young at the time, were said to have claimed they sometimes heard faint calls from the ground, as though their father's voice lingered beneath the earth. These details too come from later sources, without original documentation. The story circulated locally for decades before appearing in print. In 1953, the magazine Fate published an article recounting the Lang disappearance. The piece described the event as fact, citing oral tradition and testimony handed down through families. With that publication, the story spread beyond Tennessee. Books on unexplained disappearances and paranormal events included it. Writers of mysteries and compendiums of oddities repeated it. The central image never changed. A man walking across his land, vanishing mid-step, leaving his family, neighbours and visitors staring at an empty field. Skeptics have noted that no official missing persons report under the name David Lang has been located in Gallatin or Sumner County records from 1880. Court archives from the period make no mention of a judge witnessing such an event. Local historians have suggested that the story may have been adapted from existing folklore or created outright. Some point toward Ambrose Bierce, the American writer who published stories of sudden vanishings and strange fates around the same time. Bierce was known for blending fiction with realistic detail. It remains unclear whether the Lang case influenced Bierce, or whether Bierce's stories influenced the Lang account. Despite doubts, the story has persisted because it is specific. It gives a name, a date, a place, and witnesses. It places the disappearance not in remote wilderness, but in an ordinary field within sight of family and neighbours. That ordinariness is part of its power. Nothing dramatic preceded it, no storm, no fight, no robbery. Just a man walking forward across his own land, and then the absence where he should have been. It is the simplicity that sustains belief, even without evidence. Researchers in the 20th century attempted to trace property records in Sumner County. They found families with similar names, but no definitive record of a David Lang who fit the description. No grave marker has ever been identified. Oral traditions continue in the area, carried down through generations, sometimes told around family gatherings. Some insist the event truly occurred, others accept it as legend, a cautionary tale about the uncertainty of life in the 19th century. As with many stories, the lack of resolution keeps it alive. In later decades, the Lang disappearance became a reference point for other cases of unexplained absence. Writers compared it to stories of people who entered woods and never returned, or of individuals who seemed to vanish in the presence of witnesses. The case gained symbolic weight, standing less as a record of fact than as an emblem of the possibility of unexplained absence. Whether invention, error, or event, it shaped the language used in later retellings of vanishings. Gallatin itself has grown since 1880. Fields that were once farmland are now divided by roads and modern housing. The precise location of the supposed event cannot be confirmed. Visitors who ask about the story are directed only to general areas, not to a particular site. No marker exists, the tale survives in books, not on stone or in records. Still, locals sometimes mention it, repeating the same phrase, "He walked into the field and he was gone." In the absence of records, the Lang case remains suspended between folklore and history. The lack of evidence has not erased it. Instead, it has become a story carried forward by repetition, with the details fixed in outline but open in meaning. Was it a fabrication of local storytellers, an error passed along until it hardened into legend, or something truly unexplained? The archives give no answer. The story remains unresolved, like the field it describes, open, empty, and silent. Today, the account still appears in collections of mysteries and the paranormal. Readers encounter the description of David Lang, his wife, his children, the judge in the carriage, and the sudden absence in the middle of an ordinary day. The circle of grass, the faint voice, the silent field, these details remain, whether factual or not. The official record offers nothing but silence. The story endures. The Valley of Headless Men. In the remote wilderness of the Northwest Territories in Canada lies the Nahanni Valley, a land of deep gorges, hot springs, and sudden changes in weather. The South Nahanni River cuts through steep canyons, bordered by sharp cliffs and boreal forest. Mists rise from rapids. Ice lingers late into the year. For centuries, indigenous peoples approached the valley with caution, avoiding certain areas they described as dangerous. In the 20th century, stories of death and disappearance gave the place a second name spoken with unease: the Valley of Headless Men. The origin of that name is usually traced to 1908. That year, two brothers, Willie and Frank MacLeod, left their homes in search of a rumoured gold deposit. Tales had circulated for years of a lost mine hidden somewhere in the valley, rich in quartz and precious metals. The brothers paddled upriver with supplies and tools. When they did not return, searchers followed their route. Months later, the camp was located. Nearby lay the bodies of the two men. Both were headless. Their skulls were never recovered. Reports noted that equipment remained untouched. Robbery seemed unlikely. No cause was determined. The case was never solved. The deaths of the MacLeod brothers marked the beginning of a pattern. In 1917, another prospector named Martin Jorgensen settled in the valley, constructing a small cabin. When searchers came years later, they found the cabin burned to the ground. Jorgensen's remains were inside, his body reduced to fragments. His skull was missing. In 1945, a miner named John O'Brien was found frozen to death. He was seated on the ground, clutching a pack of matches as though he had tried to strike a fire. His head was gone. Other travellers and prospectors disappeared during those years, sometimes found, sometimes not, but often under circumstances no less strange. The Nahanni Valley is immense and hostile to settlement. Sheer cliffs rise hundreds of feet. Rivers carve deep gorges. Snow can fall in midsummer. Wolves and bears move through the forest, and hot springs vent clouds of steam against frozen ground. Despite the dangers, prospectors entered in steady numbers during the first half of the 20th century, drawn by the lure of hidden gold. Few returned with success. Some did not return at all. The combination of vanishings, bodies, and missing skulls built the valley's reputation as cursed. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated several of the deaths. Their files noted that the terrain posed obvious hazards: falls from cliffs, hypothermia, and attacks by animals. They offered no official explanation for the missing heads. Speculation filled the silence. Some suggested wolves or bears carried away skulls while leaving the rest of the body. Others thought violence among rival prospectors might explain it, decapitation used as a warning. Yet no evidence confirmed either view. No suspects were named. No arrests were made. The cases remained open and unsolved. Indigenous traditions in the region long predate the prospectors. The Dini people told of areas in the valley that should not be entered. They spoke of spirits and forces inhabiting caves and rivers, warning hunters to keep away. Outsiders often dismissed such accounts as superstition, but later events gave them new resonance. Stories circulated of shadow figures glimpsed among the rocks, of voices carried by the wind, and of hunters who entered the valley but did not return. By the middle of the 20th century, the Nahanni Valley was known well beyond Canada. Newspapers reported on it, describing the region as the Valley of Headless Men. Magazines repeated the tales of skull-less corpses, missing prospectors, and vanished camps. Writers connected the valley to curses, supernatural forces, and legendary gold mines. Adventurers organised expeditions, some searching for treasure, others determined to explain the mysteries. Few brought back more than photographs and silence. The skulls of the MacLeod brothers, Jorgensen and O'Brien, were never found. In 1976, the Canadian government declared the region a national park reserve, preserving the wilderness as Nahanni National Park. The designation ensured protection of the landscape while also formalising attention to its history. Rangers patrolling the park are aware of the reputation. They acknowledge that accidents and deaths occur in all wilderness areas, but they note that Nahanni's record is unusually grim. Though official documents rarely use the phrase, the name Valley of Headless Men remains common in folklore, travel writing and conversation. The geography of the park is striking. Virginia Falls, twice the height of Niagara, plunges into a canyon with thunder audible for miles. The river bends sharply through narrow channels, its current strong enough to overturn canoes. Dense spruce forest stretches to the horizon, broken by ridges and limestone cliffs. Winters are long and severe, temperatures sinking far below freezing. Summers bring swarms of insects that drive animals into constant motion. The land resists settlement. Cabins built by early prospectors collapsed quickly in the harsh climate. Today, only foundations and rusted tools remain, scattered markers of human attempts to stay. The unresolved cases continue to invite speculation. Some suggest that disputes among prospectors led to violence, with decapitation serving as a brutal message to others. Others imagine unknown individuals or groups using the valley for purposes that required secrecy, eliminating intruders. Natural explanations are also raised: fire, rockfall, and animal scavenging. But the recurring absence of skulls is difficult to dismiss. The detail appears too often, across too many accounts, to be ignored. No explanation has closed the file. Today, visitors reach Nahanni National Park Reserve by float plane or canoe. Guided tours bring travellers to Virginia Falls and along parts of the river. Trails exist, but cover only a small fraction of the park. Most of the land remains inaccessible. It looks much the same as it did when the MacLeod brothers paddled upriver more than a century ago. Silent, vast, and imposing. Travellers who ask about the valley are told the same stories. Some men came in search of gold and some were found without their heads. The skulls were never recovered. The valley keeps its silence. The disappearance at Hanging Rock. On February 14, 1900, Appleyard College, a boarding school for young women in Victoria, Australia, organised an excursion to Hanging Rock, a volcanic outcrop of steep cliffs and stone columns rising suddenly from the surrounding plain. It was a warm summer day. Teachers, students and a governess travelled by carriage to the site. They spread blankets beneath the shade of trees, ate lunch and prepared to explore. The day passed quietly until a small group of girls decided to climb the rock. What followed became one of the most enduring mysteries in Australian culture, though its details exist in the blurred space between fiction and history. According to the story, 4 girls began the ascent in the early afternoon: Miranda, Marion, Irma and Edith. They were joined for a time by a mathematics teacher, Miss Greta McCraw. The climb was difficult, but not beyond the ability of healthy young women. The basalt columns formed narrow passages while sunlight cut into the shadows in sharp beams. Birds called from hidden branches. The group made their way upward until, without explanation, Edith returned alone. She ran back to the picnic area in distress, incoherent and frightened. When she calmed, she could only say that the others had not followed her. Miranda, Marion, Irma and Miss McCraw were gone. They had vanished. Search parties assembled almost immediately. Local residents, volunteers and police examined every path, crevice and ledge. Lanterns illuminated the cracks in the rock at night. Dogs were brought in to follow scent, though the terrain confused them. Hanging Rock is not vast in size, yet its cliffs and fissures create a maze of concealment. Despite the effort, nothing was recovered. No garments, no bodies, no trace of the missing women. Newspapers carried the reports widely. The notion of schoolgirls and a teacher disappearing in full daylight unsettled readers. Parents withdrew daughters from Appleyard College. The headmistress, Mrs. Appleyard, became increasingly isolated. Enrollment dropped, and within a year the school was closed. The event was preserved not in police records, but in literature. In 1967, the novelist Joan Lindsay published Picnic at Hanging Rock. The book presented the disappearance as fact, naming characters, dates and locations with precision. Readers, unfamiliar with the absence of official reports, often assumed the story was historical. The novel became popular and was later adapted into a film in 1975 and eventually into a television miniseries. For many, the line between fact and fiction blurred. Tourists who visited Hanging Rock asked guides about the missing girls as though they had been real. Some guides clarified that no such disappearance had been recorded, others allowed the mystery to linger. Hanging Rock itself is real. Located near Mount Macedon, about 70 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, it is the remnant of an extinct volcano. Rising more than 100 metres above the plain, its basalt columns form caves, ledges and passages. Accidents have occurred there over the years. Visitors have fallen from ledges, become briefly lost, or suffered injury on its rough ground. Yet there has never been a confirmed disappearance of students and a teacher in 1900. The story endures because of its vividness rather than its documentation. Lindsay herself encouraged the ambiguity. She claimed the idea came to her in a dream. She wrote the novel in only a few weeks. In interviews, she often refused to confirm whether the story was fictional or based on hidden fact. An unpublished final chapter, released after her death, described the girls entering a supernatural fissure in time. Readers debated whether this revelation clarified the mystery or undermined it. Many concluded that the power of the story came from its uncertainty, the suggestion that 4 young women and a teacher walked into the rock and did not return, with no explanation offered. Folklore developed around the site regardless of the novel's fictional origin. Visitors reported feelings of unease, sudden silences, or the sense of being observed. Some described watches or compasses briefly stopping. Photographers claimed their images showed distortions of light. None of these reports were verified, yet they contributed to the atmosphere. Hanging Rock became not only a geological landmark but a cultural symbol, a place where imagination and history overlapped. The fictional headmistress, Mrs. Appleyard, was described as strict and unyielding. In Lindsay's story, she suffered decline and despair after the disappearance, eventually meeting her own end. Though invented, this detail has sometimes been repeated as fact, an example of how fiction can attach itself to place. Teachers, students, and events that never existed are still spoken of as though they did. The blending of characters with real geography blurred the record. Today, Hanging Rock remains a popular destination. Visitors climb its paths, pause on its ledges, and look across the Macedon Ranges. Plaques recognise its cultural significance. Concerts and community gatherings are held there. Yet the atmosphere of the story persists. Tourists who have read Picnic at Hanging Rock or seen the film often approach the site differently. Guides recount the tale in solemn tones. The sense of mystery endures alongside everyday activity. The rock itself is unchanged, its basalt columns rising above the plain, associated forever with a disappearance that never occurred, but that feels as if it did. The story's endurance shows the power of absence, even when imagined. The disappearance at Hanging Rock is not preserved in police archives, but in literature and film. Still, it is retold as though it belongs to history. Tourists walk the paths with the names Miranda, Marion, Irma, Edith, and Miss McCraw in mind. They look at shadows in the rock and wonder what lies beyond sight. Hanging Rock stands solid and silent, a natural formation shaped by volcanic force. Yet it carries a legend of vanishing that continues to echo in its shadow. The vanishing at Lake Anjikuni. In November 1930, reports emerged from the Canadian subarctic of an entire village that had disappeared. The account came from a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle, who travelled by snowshoe into the area around Lake Anjikuni, a remote body of water in what is now Nunavut. LaBelle was familiar with the region. He had visited camps along the lake before and expected to find families of Inuit living there. Instead, he reported silence. Smoke did not rise from the chimneys, dogs did not bark. When he entered the settlement, he found empty dwellings, food still stored, and clothing left behind. He claimed the inhabitants were gone. According to his description, more than 30 people lived in the camp. Their kayaks were missing, but there were no signs of struggle. Pots with prepared meals sat untouched and cold. Rifles, normally kept close at hand, leaned casually against door frames. In one dwelling, a pot of stew had frozen above the fire pit, as though it had been left moments before the heat died away. LaBelle said he felt unsettled, his instincts warning him that something was wrong. He left quickly to alert authorities. Soon, The Royal Canadian Mounted Police received his report, and within weeks newspapers were publishing headlines about a vanished village. The details spread widely, but they varied between publications. Some accounts claimed that graves in the village cemetery had been opened, with bodies missing. Others described sled dogs left tied to posts, starved to death. Still others reported strange lights seen in the northern sky, witnessed by travellers in the same region. The story captured the public imagination. The Associated Press carried it internationally, presenting readers with an image of an entire community gone without explanation. The isolation of northern Canada, with its endless snowfields and sparse settlements, provided a backdrop that made speculation easy. The RCMP conducted an investigation. Their official reports later stated that none of the more sensational claims could be confirmed. They acknowledged that Inuit families in the region often moved between seasonal camps, following caribou migrations and fishing cycles. In such movements, semi-permanent dwellings of stone, sod or wood might be left behind, complete with tools and equipment to be used again when families returned. What could appear to outsiders as sudden abandonment was, in reality, a routine part of survival in the subarctic. The RCMP noted that no graves were disturbed and no widespread starvation of animals was recorded. They concluded that the story had been exaggerated in the press. Still, the mystery remained unresolved, as no clear records indicated where the families had gone at that particular time. Researchers who examined the case in later decades found inconsistencies in the original reporting. Joe LaBelle himself remains a shadowy figure. Some writers suggest he may have invented or embellished the tale, perhaps to explain ordinary absence in dramatic terms. Others argue that he genuinely found a camp abandoned in unusual circumstances, and that newspapers added details to increase public interest. The truth is difficult to determine. Lake Anjikuni lies in a region far from regular travel routes. In 1930, communication was limited. A single report passed from one writer to another could easily become legend. The landscape itself contributes to the aura of mystery. Lake Anjikuni stretches wide, bordered by spruce and birch forests. In winter, snow and ice cover the land, muffling sound and erasing tracks within hours. Temperatures fall far below freezing and silence becomes profound. Travellers move by dog sled or snowshoe, crossing long distances without encountering another human being. Camps along the lake are temporary, built for hunting, trapping and fishing. When abandoned, they often appear as though people had simply stepped away, leaving belongings in place. In such an environment, the line between ordinary migration and unexplained disappearance can blur easily. Despite official skepticism, the story of the vanished village has remained in print for nearly a century. Books on the unexplained continue to include it, often alongside tales of lost explorers and phantom ships. The image of a frozen pot, an untouched meal and rifles leaning against walls continues to capture imagination. Each retelling differs slightly, some emphasizing strange lights, others focusing on graves, but the central theme persists. A trapper entered a familiar settlement and found it silent and empty. Local oral histories do not confirm the account. Inuit families in the region have long moved between camps, sometimes leaving one location unused for months at a time. They view the story as a misunderstanding shaped by outsiders unfamiliar with their seasonal patterns. Yet the persistence of the tale in newspapers and books has tied the lake to the word vanished. The story is repeated more often by those far from Nunavut than by those who live near the lake itself. Lake Anjikuni today remains remote. Few visitors reach it except by air or long overland travel. The shoreline is quiet, its forests dense, its waters cold. Old campsites may still be found, weathered by decades of wind and snow. In winter, silence covers the land. In summer, the lake reflects the long northern light. Travellers who arrive often recall the legend, asking whether a village once truly vanished here or whether a single story grew into myth. The official files are thin, evidence is uncertain. The absence endures not as a solved case but as a story carried forward, told and retold until it became part of the landscape itself. The vanishing hikers of the Ural Mountains. In January 1959, 9 young hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk in the Soviet Union set out on a skiing expedition into the northern Ural Mountains. The group, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, included 7 men and 2 women. All were experienced in winter trekking. They carried skis, tents, food supplies, and equipment suited to the season. Their destination was a Torton Mountain, a remote peak that would complete a route qualifying them for the highest level of ski touring certification. They never arrived. What happened to them became known as the Dyatlov Pass incident, one of the most studied and disputed mysteries of the 20th century. The group began their journey on January 27th. They travelled first by train, then by truck, and finally on foot, carrying their packs across snow-covered terrain. Their final stop before entering the wilderness was a small settlement called Vizai, where they spent a night and prepared for the next stage. Diaries and photographs documented their progress, showing them smiling, skiing, and maintaining good spirits despite the difficult conditions. On February 1st, they established camp on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, a mountain whose name in the Mansi language means Mountain of the Dead. Snow fell steadily, and winds swept across the open slope. Instead of descending into the forest for shelter, they pitched their tent on exposed ground. Why they chose that site remains debated. When the group did not return on schedule, search efforts began. On February 26th, a rescue team found the abandoned tent on Kholat Syakhl. It was partly collapsed and buried in snow, but still standing. Investigators noted that the canvas had been cut open from the inside. Equipment remained neatly arranged inside. Clothing, boots, and food were left untouched. Diaries and cameras were still in place. Snow covered the entrance, but no bodies were nearby. Tracks led away from the tent, descending toward the forest below. The footprints appeared to have been made by people walking barefoot, in socks, or wearing only one shoe. The first two bodies were discovered at the edge of the forest, beneath a cedar tree near the remains of a small fire. They wore only underwear and showed signs of hypothermia. A few hundred meters closer to the tent, 3 more bodies were found, including that of Igor Dyatlov. They appeared to have died while attempting to return to the tent. Their positions in the snow suggested collapse during the struggle back upslope. All 5 were determined to have succumbed to exposure. The remaining 4 hikers were not located until May, after snow melted in a ravine deeper in the forest. These bodies revealed unusual injuries. 1 man had a fractured skull, 2 had crushed chests with trauma similar to that caused by great external force, and 1 woman was missing her tongue. Some of their clothing carried traces of radiation. Soviet investigators examined the site. Their report concluded that the hikers had died as a result of a compelling natural force. The phrase was deliberately vague, and it satisfied few. No explanation was provided for why the group had fled the tent without boots, coats, or proper gear in sub-zero conditions. The cause of the severe internal injuries was unclear, resembling those from a high-impact collision yet leaving no external wounds. Radiation traces were never explained. The files were classified for years, adding to the speculation surrounding the case. Theories multiplied. One suggested that an avalanche had threatened the camp, forcing the hikers to cut open their tent and flee into the night. Another pointed to Soviet military tests, such as parachute mines or secret weapons, that could have caused panic and injuries. Some researchers proposed that infrasound produced by wind moving around the mountain could induce fear and disorientation, leading to irrational behavior. Paranormal theories also circulated. UFO encounters, Yeti attacks, or supernatural forces. None have been proven. The lack of a definitive explanation allowed speculation to persist. Witness testimony added further intrigue. Locals reported seeing strange lights in the sky near the time of the incident. Searchers described unusual burns on some pieces of clothing. The hikers' diaries revealed no signs of tension within the group. They were close friends and maintained a positive mood throughout the journey. The neat arrangement of items inside the tent suggested they had not planned to abandon it permanently, yet they never returned to reclaim their belongings. Their actions that night remain unexplained. In 2019, Russian prosecutors reopened the investigation. The following year, they announced their conclusion. The most likely cause of the tragedy was a slab avalanche. According to this theory, snow accumulated above the tent and collapsed suddenly, pressing against the fabric. Believing the camp unsafe, the hikers cut their way out and fled downslope to seek shelter. Disoriented in the dark and cold, they succumbed to hypothermia. The severe injuries of the final 4 were attributed to falls in the ravine where their bodies were later found. Critics point out that the slope of Kholat Syakhl is shallow and conditions for avalanches rare. They argue that the evidence does not fully support this scenario. Still, the official explanation remains linked to avalanche-related causes. The Dyatlov Pass incident continues to draw attention. Researchers, journalists, and tourists visit the site each year. Expeditions retrace the route in winter, enduring similar conditions to those faced by the hikers. In the city of Yekaterinburg, a monument stands honoring the 9 who died: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonashenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Their faces, preserved in photographs taken during the journey, show ordinary young people smiling in snow, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The site itself remains unchanged. Snow blankets the slope where the tent once stood. The forest borders the meadow where some of the bodies were found. Wind sweeps across the mountain, carrying snow into drifts and erasing tracks within hours. Visitors describe a silence heavier than ordinary wilderness, a sense of stillness that endures. The name Dyatlov Pass now appears on maps, though it was not marked so in 1959. The unanswered questions remain. Why did they leave the tent? What force produced such injuries? Why were some clothes radioactive? The files remain incomplete. The mountain holds its silence. The man who talked to the stars. On the evening of November 29, 1980, 71-year-old Granger Taylor left his home in Duncan, British Columbia. He was known locally as a mechanic and inventor, often described as eccentric but exceptionally skilled. He could repair logging equipment, restore antique cars, and construct machines from scrap. In his yard stood a replica of a flying saucer, built from metal sheets and spare parts. Taylor spent long hours inside it, sketching designs and writing notes. Friends and neighbours said he had a restless curiosity about engines, flight, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. That night, he drove away in his pickup truck. He was never seen alive again. In the months before his disappearance, Taylor had spoken of unusual experiences. He told those close to him that he had been in contact with beings from beyond the Earth. He said these messages came to him through dreams. According to his accounts, these beings had invited him to join them on a journey. He described the invitation calmly, with no trace of jest, and insisted he would leave soon, perhaps permanently. Some dismissed his words as fantasy. Others remembered the sincerity in his tone. On the day he vanished, he left behind a handwritten note for his parents. It said he was going to board an alien spacecraft and travel through the stars. He reassured them not to worry, promising he would return. Search efforts began almost immediately. Police examined his home, workshop, and yard. They confirmed his unusual claims and his deep fascination with space. His truck was missing, along with some personal effects. Despite canvassing nearby roads and forest tracks, no trace of him appeared. For years, the disappearance remained open. Newspapers reported the case with fascination. Some portrayed him as a dreamer who had chosen to follow his vision. Others suspected mental illness, voluntary disappearance, or suicide. Without evidence, authorities could not resolve the case. In 1986, 6 years after Taylor had vanished, loggers discovered a rusted pickup truck deep in the forest on Mount Prevost, not far from Duncan. Inside the wreck, investigators found bone fragments and clothing. The truck was identified as belonging to Granger Taylor. Among the debris were remnants of dynamite. Friends later recalled that Taylor sometimes carried explosives for his work clearing stumps from farmland. Police concluded that the explosion destroyed the vehicle and killed him. The death was ruled accidental. But the finding did not settle the matter in the public imagination. Questions remained. Why had Taylor driven so far into the remote forest before the explosion? Why was no direct suicide note found? Only the message about leaving with extraterrestrials. His family accepted the police conclusion but continued to speak about his unusual beliefs. His mother recalled him telling her that he would one day depart to meet beings from the stars. She said he spoke with calm certainty, as though he had already made peace with the decision. For some, the explosion was seen as an accident while staging a departure. For others, the lack of clarity left room for the legend to grow. Taylor's life before his disappearance showed both eccentricity and brilliance. He left school early but demonstrated remarkable mechanical ability. He once dismantled and reassembled a bulldozer entirely on his own. He built a one-cylinder car and restored a Second World War aircraft. Locals admired his skill and often sought his help. He repaired engines, tractors, and machinery for neighbours, sometimes refusing payment. His UFO replica, built from metal and salvaged equipment, became a local landmark. Children visiting the property were allowed to climb inside, where Taylor explained how he imagined interstellar travel might one day work. The craft did not function, but it reflected his fascination with flight and other worlds. After his disappearance, the story spread beyond the community. UFO enthusiasts cited it as evidence of contact. They pointed to his note, his replica saucer, and his words about beings from other planets. Skeptics emphasized the explosives and the truck wreckage, viewing the case as suicide or misadventure. Books on the unexplained included his name alongside other stories of disappearance. Television programs dramatized his final night, often repeating the image of a man driving into darkness, leaving behind a note about the stars. Each retelling centered on the same detail. He said he was leaving to join extraterrestrials, and he never returned. Mount Prevost, where the truck was found, is a heavily forested area. Logging roads wind through slopes and ridges. The site where the wreck rested was remote, far from ordinary travel. By the time it was discovered, rain and vegetation had concealed traces. Nothing at the scene explained the circumstances beyond the explosion. The truck was eventually removed, leaving only reports and photographs. The location today shows no visible sign of the event. Duncan remembers Taylor as both mechanic and mystery. Those who knew him speak of his kindness, his generosity with skills, and his restless imagination. Some prefer to remember his words, that he went to the stars. Others see tragedy, a man consumed by delusion or despair. His case remains listed in the records of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as unresolved. The note he left has been quoted many times. "Dear Mother and Father, I've gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship. As you know, I have been talking to beings from another world. They have invited me to go on a trip to see things most people will never see. Please don't worry for me, I'm better off." Whether understood as dream, delusion, accident, or legend, the story endures. On a November night, a man walked away from his workshop, drove into the forest, and entered silence. His name remains tied to the phrase spoken often in Duncan and beyond, the man who said he would travel to the stars and was gone. Some walked into the woods, others stepped into crowded streets. A few left notes that hinted at intention, most simply said nothing. What they all shared was that single moment, the last one seen, the final words spoken, the trace before silence. Where they went and why may never be known. But the absence they left remains. It lingers in forgotten police files, in fading headlines, and in trails where footsteps stopped. It lingers in the questions people still ask decades later. The stories refuse to vanish, even when the people did. If you find these disappearances unsettling, thought-provoking, or strangely familiar, you are not alone. Curiosity follows us into these quiet spaces, reminding us how fragile every moment can be. Join us as we continue exploring the places maps do not explain, the histories left unfinished, and the mysteries time has not solved. Each story adds to a record of absence, a chronicle of silence where answers should be. Subscribe for more unsolved vanishings, forgotten histories, and quiet truths hidden in plain sight. And as always, thank you for watching, and for walking with us into the spaces where the known world ends.